Okay, our next presenter is Dr. Mohamed ElGawady. He is a professor and director of structural testing lab at Missouri University of Science and Technology. He completed his PhD from Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, Lausanne, EPFL. He held several positions in different universities like Washington State University, University of Auckland, University of South Australia, and Tokyo Institute of Technology. Currently, he is the chair of the ACI 441 Reinforced Concrete Column Committee and also 341A subcommittee.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sharia, for the introduction. Today I'm going to present the work of my PhD student, Wang. We're talking about, we have a very extensive project where we looked at the effect of different environmental exposures on different concrete filled fiber tube systems. As you probably know, we have a very bad shape for our infrastructure in the US. So we have probably 9% of structurally deficient bridges, and this would require a lot of money, $32 billion to fix these infrastructures. And these are some just pictures for bridges in service. So those are bridges in service, and you can, for example, look here at this web. Again, these are just the steel piles, that we have on some bridges. We are working with Missouri Department of Transportation in two different things. The first option is how to assess and repair whatever we have. So on this act of research, for example, here we are repair some of H piles. We are testing them after accelerated corrosion. We do the corrosion, we test them, and to assess what is the capacity, and then we repair them using different options. Of interest over here is the carbon fiber. So over here we just use carbon fiber. Here is the pile after the repair. Actually, we're able to restore very close to 90% of the capacity. So we tested actually these piles until fully yielding, buckling and so on, and then straighten them, repair and retest. And we were actually able to restore about 90%, not of the capacity of the corroded piles, but the capacity of the squash load, the yielding load of the pile. So this was one option, to repair whatever you have. The other option is to look for alternative construction systems that's maybe more durable. So we're looking at two different systems. One of them is concrete filled fiber tubes, and over here we use just SCC, self-consolidating concrete, to fill the tubes. Here is a tube after we filling with the tubes. The other system is relatively quite new, hollow core fiber concrete steel columns. So on this one here, the system is a composite section. You have an outer glass fiber and inner steel fiber, and fill in between the two tubes with, again, self-consolidating concrete. We already done some of the larger scale testing, like half scale testing under cyclic load for this system. A lot of people on the literature, you see the first presentation on this session, they did concrete filled fiber tubes that are under cyclic load. So what we think there is a gap here is the durability of these systems. Most of them is working very much to provide more confinement for your concrete. Actually, when we tested the larger scale of the system here, we reached to 13% lateral drift with almost no damage to the columns. So this is just if you are interested with the self-consolidated concrete that we used, it's about 45 megapascal, slightly higher than what we typically used in Missouri, 7 KSI. We typically have 4 or 5 KSI. And then, as you're probably familiar, right now the ACI 440, they have a environmental reduction factor for glass epoxy with 0.65. So the gaps that we believe that are available in the literature, the first one is the sustained load during conditions. So most of the testing on the glass fiber that has been done either at the material level or without applying sustained load. So sustained load maybe cause some cracking, micro cracks, and then maybe cause some long-term reduction. The other thing, typically glass fiber tubes are relatively more expensive. So when you run the analysis, for example, for the hollow core columns, compare material to material, the hollow core columns came almost double the cost of the conventional reinforced concrete. However, this premium comes with a much better performance accelerated constructions, a lot of other things, but material to material, it's probably higher. So one of the things that we believe it can be, reduce the cost is to knock down on the resin. So we try to look also at polyester resin for the FRP. And then again, we use the self-consolidated concrete. What is the issue with self-consolidated concrete? You typically use higher cementitious material, and this higher cementitious material, you have more alkalinity. If you have a glass fiber, higher alkalinity, you potential problems. And then we try to look at different combinations of fluids. So we combine freeze-thaw, heating, cooling, wet and dry cycles. This is one combination of fluid. So all those were just one set. And then we look at other things like UV, like salt solution, so on as well. This is just, an assumed bridge, and we look at the bridge as following. Though the bridge here has, concrete felt fiber tubes. So the first thing we said, okay, you have some, some of these piles or columns are subject to different environmental conditions. So we have our tubes placed on the environmental chamber. So these are the carbon fiber, the concrete filled fiber tubes, and the hollow core as well. There is another portion over here. It's still subjected to environmental condition. However, it is immersed in the water, right? So we have a second set was placed also in environmental chamber, but rather than in a dry condition, that's, we immersed the fiber tubes into water tanks. So it is immersed all the time while we are running, the different cycles. The upper portion over here is still subjected to UV. So we have some rings of, these tubes that's subject to placed on a UV chamber. So these are the rings that we use for the UV chamber. And as I mentioned, we have two different types of pipes. So we have the polyurethane type, and then the epoxy pipe. So it's the color is different. This is just a producer. And then the last part, the one that's immersed on water, we said, if it's a salt water, so we have these tanks where we immersed the pipes into, or the concrete filled tubes and the hollow core columns, both were immersed into the water salt solution for a long period up to 1 year. All of them are subjected to axial loads while we are testing them, as you will see on the test matrix in a minute. So for the first one over here, these are the concrete filled tube and hollow core fiber concrete steel columns. So these are the first group that was placed on the environmental chamber. The first one is unconditional unloaded. So those are just 3 specimens that were placed on the lab. So we're just pouring them using the same concrete. Everything is the same. So this is why we call them, it's unconditioned and unloaded. And then the second group is conditioned unloaded. So the second group here is placed inside the environmental chamber and it is unloaded. The third one is conditioned unloaded. So we have the all placed inside the room, inside the environmental chamber under sustained load. And the sustained load here is typically in a bridge columns, you have somewhere between 7 to 10% depends on where you are in the States. So we apply 10% of the capacity of the exit capacity of the tubes. So here are the tubes. We have epoxy coating to ensure that all the interaction between the pipes and the environmental chamber is just to go through the glass fiber tubes. We also place some concrete cylinders to see what's going on with the concrete itself, so we can have a conclusion about the concrete as well. So here are the set of specimens. So we have 3 sets that we are going to test in compression under cyclic loads, cyclic axial load. The first one is a little bit shorter, and what we did with this one, the first one is we knock off the concrete from inside, we slice it, and then we take the rings for further examination. And we apply, as I mentioned, we apply the axial load using unbonded boss tensions. We have a bunch of strain gauges over here to follow what's going on. The second group is the one that was immersed in water and placed inside the environmental chamber. So what we have over here, again, the unconditioned one, no load, no water, no load with water, loaded, no water, load with water. So we have, the different combination with this group. And this group over here, we use epoxy resin. The first one, we use the polyester resin. So here are the specimens, the loaded with water, and loading over here, again, we apply using duodeck bars to apply the 10% axial capacity to the columns. Well, the environmental chamber loading is a little bit complicated over here. So, the environmental chamber, the test regime itself is a separate study actually. So, a while ago we had the students who collected the bad weather in Missouri for 20 years, and we compressed all these bad weather into 72 days. So we compressed, so we know he did the analysis for about 20 years long periods. So it was originally prepared for repair, but we're still using it with MoDOT. So we collected the weather in 20 years, look at this, collected the bad days, compressed them in a short period. It ended up with 72 days. So what we have over here is 50 cycles of plus or minus, so we move between minus 20 to 10 Celsius, and then another 50 cycles between higher temperatures, 50 cycles with relative humidity, and then temperature, humidity, and so on. So the total, as I mentioned, is 72 days or 350 cycles of loading. The third group of specimens were subjected to, again, unconditioned, and then we have these three different tanks. So T1, T2, T3 representing different temperatures. So the temperatures ranging from, I'm sorry, it's in Fahrenheit, from about 72 up to 140. So we have three different temperatures, and we have we ensure that the temperature is constant, so we keep the water is moving, and to ensure that the same temperature, and also the salt solution. So we take samples of the water every week to ensure the salt solution is the same, the concentration. So in total, we have 51 specimens for the hollow core fiber concrete steel, another 51 specimens for the concrete filled fiber tube. For those ones over here, we go every 3 months for the for each tank, and we take some specimens and we test them in compression. We run the microstructure analysis on all the stuff, so we can track actually over the year how the strength degrade over the year. So for each tank, we tested specimens at 4 different periods. During the presentation here, we're going to call them B1, B2, B3, B4. So here is a test setup. So what we did here on the test setup for each tank, because it's the same temperature, we have five set of specimens of concrete filled fiber tubes, and then next on the same tank we have 5 sets of the hollow core fiber. Okay, and then we have a steel plate. We loading using the Dewey bars, and then we have springs over here to ensure that the load is constant with time. And so we have HSS over here where we can anchor the Dewey bars. We have load cells, strain gauges on the Dewey bars, and we regularly monitor the loads and the strains to ensure that it's constant during testing. And this is a tank. This is the how it looks like, the test setup, and this is while we are loading the test specimens, and this is just how it looks like. So this is a very first few days. So the first 15 days you have some variation on the unbonded post tension. So you load, you lose some load, you go back and load, and so on until it's after about 10-15 days you start to see a constant load over the specimens. So as I mentioned, we have 3 replica tanks, different temperatures, 73, 95, and 140. We have 3.5 sodium chloride. pH was about 8. And then we take the specimens outside at 90, 200, 300, and 450 days. So it's roughly slightly more than a year. On the other group, what we did is we slice the as versus pipes, and we blend them on the on a chamber where we subject them to UV UV rays. So these are the rings, and we did this for epoxy specimens and also for polyesters. And then once we take a cylinder out of each one of those groups, you take the cylinder out, you apply compression, and since our interest was in seismic, we apply a cyclic axial load. So we did also some microstructure analysis, FTIR, and then so this is one of the interesting things. So over here we did the SEM analysis for the specimens. So those two are the ones that without loading. So for example, here this is the FRP side, this is the concrete. You see there is a difference here of 75 microstrain. This is probably due to shrinkage of concrete. Whenever we apply the load, this gap, and this is consistent. I'm here presenting just a sample here. So over here, when we apply the sustained load, this gap here close to 34 microstrain, the gap between between the concrete and the FRP. This is probably due to the dilation of the concrete under the sustain. Here is just again another sample for the SEM specimens that we get from the tank. So this is tank 1, the low temperature, period 2, that's about 6 months. And we don't really see much. We have some holes here on the resin that we believe it's just during the manufacture. And as the temperature going up and the duration going longer, you start to see more damage. So let me go to see one of the worry things here. So for example, you start to see some resin cracks. This is tank 2, a little bit higher temperature for a year of exposure. So you start to see some resin cracks. You start to see also some damage to the epoxy glass fiber interface. So you see here the delamination that you start to see, and some cracking as well. This is tank 3 at about 1 year. So the microstructure showing some damage at the microstructure level. I'm not going to go through this as we don't have too much time remaining. Okay, here is a damage. So what's really was interesting after the exposure, typically you see more imperital FRP. So this imperital is converted to, you see more brittle, and this brittleness you can see in even the sound, the one that was exposed to a higher duration of exposure for a higher temperature, for example, you see really a very high sound when it was crushed on the lamp. And concrete, because this is relatively high strength concrete, you don't really see too much damage. It's typically a single big crack, and then continue like this. So here's just a sample of the resin, the first group that was not placed on the water, just inside the environmental chamber. So the retention here is this is 100%. That's mean you don't lose anything after the exposure. So for example, here the strain was very sensitive. So the hoop strain, we have a very high variation here, but generally you lose about 40% of your strain. So this is something crucial, because this would affect your confinement and ductility if you design for seismic. Strength-wise, we didn't really use much, and again, this is related to the fact that you embrittle the fiber, so you didn't really see much in terms of strength reduction, but you see axial and hoop strain reductions. This one was the one placed on the water inside the environmental chamber. Again, the mode of failure. We just found one interesting mode difference here on the mode of failure. The one with the epoxy, we start to see some more delamination first, versus the one with the polyester, we see a complete pull out of the fibers from the resin. And looking at the placing them on the water, we didn't really see much difference. It's much better than the polyester here. And so, for example, if you have unconditional, this is the retention is 100% in terms of axial strain. But when you have load and water, expose them to load and water, we lose about 8% in terms of strain and about 9% in strain. So you don't really, lose much after probably 3 months of exposure into the water. This is just how it looks like, the specimens after the UV. So you see some of the sort of micro cracks, if you like, on the surface here, but it's some superficial, because when we did the ring test, we didn't see much difference in terms of strength and strain. So this is the when we tested the ring after the UV, you lose 2% here. For the epoxy, for the polyester, we almost lose nothing. And then these are the specimens that were placed on the tanks. Some buckling on the steel inside the tubes, and this is the normalized strength. So whenever we have really a high temperature for a long duration, you really lose about 40% into your axial capacity. Okay, the reduction here is decreased as we go. And then we use Ryan's model to see how this would be reflected into the long-term behavior of this one. So for example, we talk few cities here. So we take for example, San Francisco, and we assume a service life, different service life, 50 year, 100 year, 150. And we look at, for example, at 150, you lose about 50% of the capacity of your column, because, at 55 degree and using this exposure. And then for the same thing, we run the same thing for concrete filled fiber tubes. We run this assignment for different cities across the US. So with this, I reached to the conclusion of my talk. The one that was really severe is the salt solution for high temperature and for a long duration exposure. UV didn't really do much for the specimens, and also generally, as you would expect, epoxy performed much better than polyester. However, when it comes to cost, epoxy is about the double cost of polyester. So you need to do your math and see which one is better for your project. Thank you very much for your attention.